Hello, and welcome to Brief Encounters. I'm Angela Parsons and one of the steering committee co-chairs of the DC Bar's DC Affairs community. The DC Affairs community serves our legal community and follows legal and political issues affecting the District of Columbia. In August, DC's shadow representative, Oye Owolewa, announced he would not seek re-election after serving 5 years in the role. So this year we thought it was an opportunity to highlight not only his service to the district, but historical and critically important leadership in the district through an unconventional path, our non-voting delegates and shadow representatives and senators. We are so lucky to be joined today by Representative Owolewa. He was born and raised in the Boston, Massachusetts area, received his degrees from Northeastern University, including a doctorate in pharmacy, and now a practicing pharmacist. Representative Owolewa also previously served as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, or ANC rep, for Ward 8. Good afternoon, Representative. Thank you for joining us today.
Really excited to be here.
So before we get into our topic, can you tell us a little about how you came to the district, where you grew up, what made you move to DC?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. My mom and dad moved to Boston, Massachusetts, went to Northeastern University, and they decided to stay put. I was born and raised in Boston, and as you mentioned, I graduated from Northeastern University many years later as a doctor of pharmacy, and I just wanted to give back. So I moved to DC to not only start my pharmacy profession, but to also get involved in getting young kids interested in science careers, pushing that same early career exposure that I received and I was privileged to have as a young kid.
Well, how did you get to politics from pharmaceuticals?
Interestingly enough, I was involved in the classroom pharmacy, and I was actually good just to do that. But then one day I had a patient of mine that came in and told me to get more involved in the community. She told me about something called an ANC. And she left the pharmacy. I looked at my phone and I saw a South African political party. So I thought this person was telling me to go back to Africa. I'm not even South African. So when she came back like a month later, I was steaming mad. I was ready to yell at her. And she told me about the ANC neighborhood commissioner. And I asked her if she was still a commissioner. And she's like, no, she's a council member. This is Brianna Nadeau. And when I finally moved to Ward 8, I went to a meeting. It was a little bit dysfunctional. It wasn't well run. And I just started talking bad about all the commissioners. And somebody turned around and said, if you're so much better, why don't you run? And that started my political career. And I ended up winning that race by one single vote, starting my life in public service.
Excellent. Well, what made you interested in running for shadow representative?
Well, long story short, being a commissioner that won by one vote, I decided to get involved in everything. And one day I saw a DC vote statehood lobbying event. Now, me as a Bostonian originally, I knew nothing about DC statehood, but they were offering free food, so I went. So I went to Congress and we started having conversations about voting rights, equal rights, justice, and statehood. And long story short, I caught the bug, and that energized me to look into being more involved. And then my predecessor, Frank Garcia, decided to run for council, opening up the U.S. representative, often called a shadow representative role, and we ran for that and we were successful.
Well, we wanted to do this discussion to help educate the public about the somewhat unique role of shadow representatives in the district. But before we say too much about what shadow representatives are, it might be helpful to say what they're not. So there's also a position associated with Congress known as non-voting delegates, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that first. Delegates have been around since the Continental Congress in 1787, and they were mostly representatives from U.S. territories before they became states. So, for example, the Colorado Territory had delegates from 1861 to 1876, Hawaii from 1900 to 1959, and sometimes they would be regions, like the Dakota Territory had delegates from 1861 to 1889. But once these territories became a state, the delegates would usually be replaced by the constitutional representation we're more familiar with. Representatives in the House, decided by population, and 2 senators per state. Now, after the Spanish-American War in 1898, Congress established the position of the resident commissioner, and that was created to allow for representation of territories that had a different relationship with the federal government than those territories were already on the path to statehood. So, for example, Puerto Rico gained a resident commissioner in 1900, and the Philippines had 2 resident commissioners until its independence from the U.S. in 1946. Then, in 1970, Congress allowed the District of Columbia to elect a delegate through the passage of the District of Columbia Delegate Act. And this is very interesting. President Richard Nixon repeatedly expressed his support for voting representation for the District of Columbia. He called the district's lack of voting rights one of the truly unacceptable facts of American life. He actually wrote to the then House Minority Leader Gerald Ford that year, and he encouraged Ford to support passing this bill. One of the bill's supporters, Democratic Congressman Michael Harrington of Massachusetts, pointed out, and I like this quote, I wrote it down: Congress simply does not have the time or the interest to run a large city. It is time we recognized this fact and permitted the city to govern itself. The complexities of city government, the day-to-day decisions, should not be placed in the hands of 535 different people, all of whom have to pass on matters about which they have little concern and about which they lack the time to be informed. That's still relevant today. Currently, there are 6 non-voting delegates in Congress, including 4 territories: Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, American Samoa, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, as well as Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And we should note that delegates from the Cherokee and Choctaw nations have treaty rights to send delegates to Congress, but delegates have never actually been seated for either nation. Now, there have been 2 district delegates since 1970. I'll mention them just briefly. The first district non-voting delegate was Walter Fauntleroy. He's a civil rights activist and pastor, director of the Washington Bureau of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and a DC coordinator of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, as well as a coordinator of the Selma to Montgomery marches and the 1966 March Against Fear. President Lyndon Johnson also appointed him vice chairman of the DC City Council in 1967. And this was pre-home rule, so the 9-member body was appointed directly by the President of the United States then. So he's elected delegate in March 1971, and then he held that seat for 20 years. And by the way, a week after he was sworn in, he became one of the 13 founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Our second was Eleanor Holmes Norton, and she has an incredible career, including, among many, many achievements, civil rights activist, lawyer, professor, legal director for the ACLU, chair of the New York City Human Rights Commission, chair of the U.S. EEO Commission, as well as longtime delegate for the District of Columbia. January 26, 2026, it was announced she would not run for re-election to the post she's held for 18 terms since 1991. Now, you must know her in her capacity as shadow representative. Did you see her work as a model for what the shadow representatives could do, or is it a very different job?
Well, both. So she was definitely somebody that I looked up to. I talked about feeling the urge to get involved in DC politics and federal politics as well. It was really when I brought Congresswoman to my ANC to discuss her role where I really felt like this is something I can do as well and support. And one of the things that always come up when I go to community meetings is the difference between her role as a delegate and my role as a shadow representative. So I'll go through it briefly. So number one, Congresswoman Norton, she has congressional staff. She has an office on Capitol Hill. She's able to be in committee and oftentimes vote on committee. But when votes come to the floor, she doesn't have a vote because DC is not a state. Now, as the representative, I don't have a congressional staff. I don't have a congressional office, nor am I on committee. But I do find a role and opportunities to really support by going to ANC meetings, finding the differences between federal jurisdiction and local jurisdiction, and being able to help and support in those ways. We help people get visas. We help folks get their mailboxes back and really try to improve the quality of life of district residents. This role is a little bit different than, say, the delegate, because the U.S. shadow representative, according to the Tennessee Plan and beyond, really here to fight for DC statehood and be that placeholder position. So once DC were to become a state, this role can elevate to what you see from the Jasmine Crockett's, Steny Hoyers, or Hakeem Jeffries, being equal to any other representative in Congress.
That is a great transition to my next question, which was, in 1982, DC voters ratified a state constitution that authorized the election of the shadow delegation. And this is all part of what's known, as you pointed out, the Tennessee Plan strategy. Could you tell us a little more about that historically and the potential for using that blueprint to push for DC statehood?
Absolutely. So the idea behind the Tennessee Plan is people in an area that's not a state basically petition and lobby Congress to become a state, whether it's passing a local constitution, which DC has already done, elected shadow representatives, which I am one we've already done, but also put pressure on Congress to find that admissions process. Now, whether it was in the previously slave states versus free states, or Democratic leaning states versus Republican leaning states, most recently Alaska and Hawaii, typically have come in as a pair, neutral balancing political leaning states. We are here trying to demand our own entry as a state, whether it's with another area like Puerto Rico or beyond, or even just become the 51st state by itself. People in DC, we are yearning to become a state, whether it's having voting rights or some of the other things, whether it's passing our laws, have final say over our budget, or even control our National Guard. We've seen in the last few years the importance of being a state. We're trying to follow any which way to become that.
Thank you for that. So DC then moves forward with elections for a representative and 2 senators, and some very prominent people ran for these offices right away. Our first 2 senators were Jesse Jackson and Florence Pendleton. And Jesse Jackson, of course, everyone knows who Jesse Jackson is. He's very well known, a civil rights activist, politician, ordained Baptist minister. He worked under Martin Luther King Jr. He participated in the Selma and Montgomery marches in 1965 and founded organizations that later merged into the Rainbow Coalition Operation Push. He only stepped down in 2023. He ran for president in 1984 and 1988. He considered running for DC mayor in 1990, but instead he ran for the newly created shadow senator position, which he won with 57% of the vote, and he held that until 1997. Now, Senator Jackson's seat was succeeded by attorney and former Ward 3 ANC Representative Paul Strauss in 1997, who was reelected 4 times, still ably represents the district today. Florence Pendleton won the other original shadow senator seat. She was a teacher and a political activist before her election, an administrator of DC public schools, and later founded the nonprofit STAND, and I'm sure you're interested in this, the Society for Teaching Americans About New Columbia and DC Statehood. Now, she was a former Democrat, but then she ran as an independent in 2007, but she was defeated by businessman Mike Brown, who represented the district as a shadow senator from 2007 until his retirement in 2024. And then voting rights attorney and former Ward 2 ANC representative Ankit Jain succeeded to the seat in 2024. So that's shadow senators. So now we're going to circle back to you and representatives. The first DC shadow representative was Charles Moreland. He's also a very prominent lawyer and political consultant in the district. He won this election in 1990, and he was the chief national lobbyist for the District of Columbia Voting Rights Amendment, which passed both chambers of Congress, and he testified before a number of state legislatures to support ratification of the constitutional amendment, which would have given DC full representation. And unfortunately, this amendment did not receive enough state ratifications by its 1985 deadline. He also later founded the New Columbia Times newspaper and the Douglas Commonwealth Coalition. So like other members of the House of Representatives, shadow representatives have 2-year terms. And following Representative Moreland, there have been 7 other representatives up until you won the election in 2020, and you've been representing us ever since. So on that note, would you like to talk about some of your political priorities, and feel free to highlight some successes while serving as shadow representative?
Absolutely. I appreciate that question because as I sunset my role as the U.S. representative, it's really important to see how much progress we've been able to do in the last 4.5 years. When I first ran for U.S. representative, the conversation about statehood really began and ended with voting representation in Congress, which is really important. But as I mentioned earlier, it's the way we pass our laws, the way we're able to control our budget, the way we're able to, handle our federal controlled justice system that really impacts the lives of DC residents. So I've been really proud to do a lot of the things that really helps improve quality of life measures. Like number one, we created an expunge clinic to help returning citizens get their records sealed, get their lives on track, basically live better lives so we can all live in safer neighborhoods. Number two, we taught local business owners how to get contracts, certifications, and grants. A lot of the things that sometimes escape us because they're more plentiful in Maryland and Virginia and beyond. And most recently, as of last year, we coordinated immigration town halls to help the non-citizen community navigate this new political climate with the new president back in office. So although that's not exactly lobbying in Congress, which we've already done and gotten co-sponsors for the DC Admissions Act, we've also done a lot of things in the community to help improve lives, especially for those who oftentimes don't feel seen by their local representation. We really try to plug the holes left by not being a state and really improve the lives and create opportunities for DC residents.
You also have expressed some interest in other topics, traffic safety, affordable housing, healthcare. Would you like to talk about any of those interests that you have?
Absolutely. Me being a pharmacist, DC's only elected healthcare worker, I found it important to get involved with public health. Whether it's bringing Howard School of Pharmacy to various senior pop-ups, or even opining in legislation that impacts our healthcare system. Right now in DC, we're facing a huge deficit. We're looking at Medicaid being cut and whatnot, and we're involved in unveiling the Healthy DC plan, which creates a stopgap or a bucket for folks who otherwise wouldn't have health insurance. We've gone to classrooms, still not only talking about my life as a pharmacist, but also increasing civic engagement for young people. We've stopped by student governments in elementary schools, trying to get young people to see themselves as today's leaders, not just leaders of tomorrow. So whatever you think, we've been involved, especially being Nigerian American. We got a swath of people nationwide calling us for constituent service issues. So sometimes you'll see me on Capitol Hill saying, please handle this, because they call my mom if they don't. We'll be able to plug those holes as well. So I'm really proud of the work we've been able to do as DC's representative.
The DC Affairs community makes an effort to provide information about DC's legal landscape to our many law students in the district. So, to that audience, how would you suggest students can use their legal training to support statehood?
Getting involved, whether it's helping opine, going to ASC meetings, filling in the gaps in our legal conversations, going online, sharing your information, sharing your expertise. But also, if folks aren't even from DC, contacting your representative, contact your congressperson, getting them on board with DC statehood. And if they're on the opposite side of this conversation, they don't support DC statehood, just applying that pressure to get them to reconsider. Oftentimes when you're reaching out to a senator or you're reaching out to the representative, they want you to put your ashes in to see if you're their own constituent. So leaning in, getting your family members and getting your friends to be involved in this is just as important as any legal information that you have. We're all in this together.
As you depart from this office, moving on to other things, what qualities do you think voters should look for in the next person who steps into your shoes?
One thing we need is energy. I know people in this current role as shadow representative, shadow senator, bemoan the fact that they're not getting paid. And we don't get paid. However, if we put in a lot of energy, put in a lot of effort, put in that time to make sure people's lives are better, then it doesn't matter how much we're getting paid. If we work up to the role, we can really bring new opportunities to the next generation of leaders. I'm very proud to help people become ANC. I'm even helping people look into this role I'm in right now, because we do really need better leaders in office, more strong-willed leaders in office, and also people with energy in office. The good thing about this role, because the shadow representative, it's like a blank canvas to do some of the things you want to do. There's some people have the might and the will and the people power of galvanizing our community. We can make a huge difference. We're seeing Free DC, we're seeing PSL, we're seeing so many organizations stand up in our current climate of DC crisis, and having more leaders stepping up as well is what we need in the city. So if folks are interested in this race, please look into it. But you don't have to be elected to be a leader. We're seeing just that in the demonstrations, the activism, this energy and conversation happening in the district.
Representative Owolewa, thank you so much for being here, sharing this fascinating history with us today. Any final words?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, get involved. When I first ran for office, as I told you before, somebody just dared me to do it. And I'm glad I took that jump. A lot of people feel like you have to be part of the right family or have a lot of money or have a lot of connections. And while those do help, it doesn't mean everything. So if you care about something, get involved, whether it's the DC Bar Association, pro bono part of DC Bar, or even just any community group, because it's going to help create that difference for at least one person, and hopefully that one person becomes two people, and go from there.
DC Affairs appreciates your support of the bar, and most of all, we thank you for your years of service to this great city. We certainly wish you well in your next adventures.
Thanks for having me.
I also want to thank the DC Affairs Community's 2025 Law Fellow, Haven Greer, for her research and coordination on this podcast today. As a reminder to listeners, if you're a local attorney and you like this kind of local history or issues of DC home rule and statehood, I'd encourage you to join the DC Affairs community of the DC Bar. Our monthly meetings are noon on the second Friday of each month. Please reach out to the DC Affairs community if you're interested in attending. On behalf of the DC Affairs community, thank you again to Representative Owolewa, and thanks for listening.